Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with season 9, episode 36 of our weekly Q&A videos, video/podcast, I should say. Links in the description to check this out on most of the major podcasting platforms. I say most because I have no clue what they all are. And it's a good number of them. It's as many as I would need them. Right. And there's an RSS feed, so I guess you can put it on pretty much anything that lets you do that.
Right.
Which should be any podcast platform worth their salt anyways. But
so this is the place where you talk people into listening to the podcast instead of watching videos. No, I'm just saying this is going to be our rules. You'll get to talk people into listening to the podcast and us losing ad revenue.
Yeah.
And this is where I get to talk about what's going to happen on the video and why the footage should be compelling enough that you'd want to watch it as a video.
I feel like there needs to be a third person to say, you could also support us on Patreon, but I guess there's no time for that.
We'll do that at the end.
Yeah.
So the reason the footage is interesting this week because I try to do a number of things. So it depends on how much time we have, and because we got away from doing this talk while the footage is playing in the background so that we could put it in sync and we could make comments on what's happening in the fight. So we got away from that because it was taking longer to make these videos. So depending on how much time we've got and what footage fits the best, I had Metahuman Flash initially, and I got footage of him because this is his week's multiplayer reward.
Yeah.
And with Hawkgirl and New 52 Wonder Woman as the base characters, Metahuman Flash is playing a role, if you're watching the video, that could be actually played by a lot of different characters, which is why I just tried out Reverse Flash. So I'd have some footage for Thursday, but as I was playing it, I thought, so he's doing this, and I'm focusing on using the special one as a time waster to bring, and a special disabler to bring in New 52 Wonder Woman again. And I think, well, who is actually a better time waster and a specialist than Man of Steel Superman? And that ties into a question we have later, I think if we get to it this week, about characters to use on your team.
Yeah.
So there'll be some interesting things, and if people want more comment on the fighting stuff, feel free to ask us, but make sure you're clear about referencing, because every once in a while we get these questions where it's really clear that they're talking about one specific thing that we're saying in the video, and I cannot for the life of me sometimes remember what we were saying when...
It's very funny. It's because they have like a time machine, right? At any time they want, you can access as a viewer what we said any number of days, weeks, or months beforehand.
Yeah.
And for you, it's happening now. Yeah. You're replying to the conversation that we are having in your ears at the moment you're having it.
Right.
And to us, we see this and we go, oh man, what did we say a month ago at at 7:41?
Listen, it's not always that bad. Even if they're saying it like within days of us posting it, sometimes I still don't remember because, I mean, we've been doing this for years. And there's hours and hours of stuff.
Yeah. What comment did we make at 7:41 p.m. on November 8th, 2022 that they're referring to?
So a timestamp, if you're going to be asking a question like that, is really helpful.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very good. The other problem with that is that now we kind of, going forward, are at the mercy of whether or not people have watched this particular moment of this particular video and remember it. So we're asking people something if they comment that they've seen this and they are aware of it.
Right.
So this PSA... is only helpful if all of our audience is somehow funneled through this inflection point.
Now, speaking of time and stuff, I think, every once in a while we comment on what's happening in the world that's bubbled up to our consciousness, and it places this video at a point in time. And I feel like I want to just make one comment about Twitter.
Okay. Yeah, because for the past little while now, I feel like you go on Twitter and half of Twitter is people talking about what's happening with Twitter.
Talking about Elon Musk buying it out and about Twitter falling apart.
Yeah, because whether or not it actually falls apart, I think for the time being, there's been big moments that has made discourse on Twitter so penetrating that you almost... If you're looking for your sort of business as usual content, you almost just have to log off for a couple days. And right now, I think this is that, right? I think when the Queen died, everybody had something to say about it, whether or not they were, no matter what their opinion was. And I think it was mostly anti-monarchy stuff from what I was seeing. Although I know that I'm only on sort of the part of Twitter that I'm on, right?
Right.
But it's like pretty much the thing that people are talking about for a little bit. And it's been for a while now what's happening with it.
Right.
Which makes sense.
So I'm going to focus on the one area. Everybody's had a talking point. Everybody's talked about how it's going to fall apart and why certain suggestions he's made have been really bad.
Yeah.
I want to focus on one thing that ties a little bit into my experience with Injustice and Injustice 2.
Okay.
And it's funny. So one of the suggestions, or one of the ideas that Elon Musk floated was potentially making it free to a certain extent. And then after a certain point, you have to pay to play. And it's funny because on the surface, superficially, it looks like some of the things that we've talked about in Injustice, it ties into, I say, if you're going to support the devs, the best way is to buy the recharges, because then you're actually getting to play more. Yeah. And it doesn't work for Twitter, because with Twitter, the I guess what I see as issues with Twitter, what people complain about is that they end up doom scrolling, and then they end up staying on Twitter way longer than they should and being less productive in the day. Yeah.
And it doesn't make them happy. There's a certain amount, or more than a certain amount of Twitter is fundamentally like a bad thing for them.
Right.
Or at least it's perceived to be, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess the biggest difference, even though superficially they're the same, is that very rarely do I hear people talking about playing Injustice so much
that they wish they could stop.
And that they resent it. So it feels like the suggestion that he's coming up for Twitter is actually going to not make money and get people off it. And the people who are on it are the ones that are generating content anyways. And it's going to defeat it. Whereas in Injustice, because you haven't hit that critical mass where people end up using it so much that they resent it and feel like it's too much of a time sink. I guess maybe we just don't know enough people who are trying to get in the top 10 who are playing hours and hours and hours every day.
Well, what was actually funny is that I had a joking idea with my friend for a social media platform. That's whole thing was time limiting. But since any time limiter you can kind of remove the artificial limit on, and any like a hard stop might feel hard for people, but time limiting people by purposefully making the user experience worse after a certain amount of time. And the way that you could do it was that you would slowly ratchet up the percentage of ads to real posts. And so if people wanted to go on it, you would be monetizing them, but you'd be encouraging them to leave. You would say, now 50% of your posts are going to be ads, and now it's going to be 90%. And so you just make it unpleasant to be on until they want to leave. And if somebody still suffers through it, then you end up getting significantly more money out of them.
So, but even,
as like an evil way of doing ostensibly a good thing.
But even if you wanted to do that, let's say for sake of argument that was going to potentially work for Twitter. The problem is the advertisers are leaving in droves. So there's a bunch of advertisers that I've read about, like the ones that stand out in my mind are like the car manufacturers. Because Elon Musk has been complaining that it's not free speech, that the fact that the advertisers, I can't remember how he phrased it, but basically the upshot was that somehow they were infringing upon his free speech by not advertising with him and by pulling the money. I think it's funny because the reason why they should have is they're direct competitors.
Yeah. It was something about saying how there were like left-wing protesters who made a mass exodus of advertisers from the platform, and they're trying to kill free speech in America. Right.
Yeah.
Or destroying free speech in America, something like that. It was funny on a couple levels because it was like the in America, destroying free speech. It's all of these things on layers. And so it's interesting. I'm going to make a reference to this as obliquely as possible because I can't talk about it a lot. But I was recently talking with somebody about a way to monetize a platform and how you can monetize ethically. And it's interesting because I think it also kind of comes back to Twitter, because I was talking about what we have with our Patreon. Where we go, people can give us money for some nominal good, right? We have tiers, there are rewards. You can get stuff from them, theoretically. Right? You can get your name read at the end, which is like the one that sort of everybody is getting as long as they specifically ask to not have it.
And then don't ask not to have their name read out. Right.
Yeah. So you get it by default, and then you can say, obviously if you just want to be anonymous, but like almost everybody, is getting that. And then we have
we sort of stretched it out. Like we promise certain levels that we read out their names, and the one level we don't promise
is the buck a month.
We do it anyways, but we put them all on the same screen at the one time.
It's an appreciation. We still appreciate them supporting us. But then the higher tiers, where theoretically, you can get more stuff. Have us read something out for you or whatever.
Nobody's taking advantage of that.
People don't take advantage of it because people who want to support us, it turns out just want to kick us a couple bucks our way.
Right.
And so it's very much like, give us money because you want to support us. Don't give us money to, get something from us. Right. It's not meant to be a sort of transactional thing. It's meant to be something that we appreciate if you want to do it.
Right.
And we're trying to make it feel like it's valuable. We're trying to say we're offering appreciation. Yeah. But how I think we know that the people supporting us kind of have the same understanding of it as we do, and that we've cultivated sort of like the right thing, is that nobody's in there going like, I want this message read out. Where's my message? Where's my rewards?
Yeah.
And to be fair, if anybody wanted it, I'd be happy to read out messages. I'd be happy to do whatever. But we've never had anybody, needle us for it. We've never had anybody go, I don't think I'm getting enough out of this. Right. It doesn't really feel like the same degree of, transaction. And so we're talking about it. I think a really nice way is if you're doing a platform and it's supposed to be good, it's supposed to be good for the community.
Right.
Instead of going, pay us money so that you can get these features. It's like, hey, we want to keep doing this. There's a certain amount that this costs. Right. And then after that, we also want, to be able to do more stuff like this. We want to have the resources to do something else, to do new stuff, to keep working on this. So we would really appreciate it if this has value to you. We appreciated it if you could support us. And maybe, there are these things that we can do to show our appreciation to you. Maybe there's these services, features, whatever else. Maybe we can, find something that makes us both feel good about this. But really what you're doing is giving us the money to keep this going and then hopefully do something else cool. Because if you like this, trust us on the next thing, right?
It's like a tip jar more than it is transactional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think the way that Elon has talked about it to some extent, he is using that kind of tact, right? This needs money. So we're trying to make the bills, we're trying to make the numbers work.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we need. And the reason why it doesn't work is because he just spent $44 billion on it.
That's what I was going to say.
And he knew everything going in. And he wanted it. And so what it is he comes in, and then the first and only thing he's talking about the whole time he's there is money. He didn't build it. He's not this sort of small community guy who's like, hey, I need, this to be a thing. He bought it. He's paid a ridiculous amount of money for it with this grand vision of like free speech and reforming the platform and making it better. And then the second he's gotten in, the whole time, all he's talked about is the stuff that's money related. And so that's why it doesn't work for me.
Right. So the interesting thing to that is that he's not founded a lot of companies, but he's bought a few successful companies. Yeah. And part of me wonders if that the difference here isn't that he's changed his approach. It's that it's the same approach, but it's just more transparent.
It's really public facing.
Right, exactly.
It has to be.
Right. So I wonder if this is just him showing his bum to everybody, whereas before he could get away with pretending like he's making more contributions than just being money bags.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, if he was a different guy, if this was a different thing, if it wasn't a $44 billion acquisition of this huge company, then I think he could come in and go, hey, we need money, we need to keep the lights on, this is what we're trying to do.
Right.
But he's not. But even in something like Wikipedia, right, where they ask for money, and then there's that question of, you guys don't really pay your editors, right? Where does this money go to? What are you funding? And people will go, I feel weird because most of the value of Wikipedia does not come from people who are being paid for Wikipedia.
Right.
So it's weird if I'm giving you this money, it feels weird for it to only go to like the Wikimedia Foundation and all your projects and everything else you do and server hosting and then also everything else. And 0% of it goes to like the editors and whatever else. It's like if you were tipping somebody and they said, by the way, I am giving 0 cents of this to the kitchen staff. You go, I still feel like maybe you should get a tip. Even if you're providing good service, I still feel like you should get some money. But it feels a little more uncomfortable to me now that I know that some people I think who are getting left out of it, that should be maybe included. Right?
So I wonder if, let's say for example Tesla, at least compared to say Twitter, at least Tesla, even though he bought into it and he didn't found it, he can at least give the impression that he was there at the beginning so that because it's all behind the scenes, there are people who mistakenly think that he actually was a founder, that he did this thing instead of bought this thing.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it's because Twitter is just so much bigger by the time he got into it that whole idea of, building the community, being part of creating it, it's not possible anymore.
Yeah, I think when something has more of its like legs underneath it, I think people can be really strong forces. I think about, the CEOs who really defined company culture for like a little while. So, or public perception of what the company was. So Reggie Fils-Aimé for Nintendo of America, right? He was really big in that. You thought about like Nintendo's like press releases, and you thought about him. So there was the characters. There was Satoru Iwata, Shigeru Miyamoto, Reggie Fils-Aimé. So you have this sort of like Japanese.
I don't know any of them, but
yeah. But so you have like the Japanese like Nintendo people that you associate, and then you think Nintendo of America. You think about the North American sort of presence for Nintendo, and you think about Reggie, and you know, I think there's ways for people to come in and be the face of something, right? But I think Twitter was so big. I think, you know, Elon Musk kind of is the face of Twitter right now. Well, but not in a good way. Yeah. You don't get I think you have to prove yourself. And I think if you want people to look at you fondly, you need to be working for a company that people like. And you also need to feel like you're an important part of the messaging or the brand or the positivity or whatever. And so I think the other weird thing is that a lot of people use a lot of Twitter, but a lot of social media sites, people kind of hate them while they use them. You know what I mean? It doesn't make them happy. Right. And there are people...
And they know it doesn't make them happy. Like there's a difference between something not making you happy, but also having that self-awareness and the resentment when you're there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's one sort of face of a brand who I think about in Canada who's gotten a lot of fire. It's the price freezes with no frills. Oh, right. There's that guy. I forget what his name is.
Galen Weston.
Yeah. Yeah. Where everyone's like, you know, screw this guy. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I think the thing is that, you know, everybody needs groceries, right? But I think anybody who doesn't have enough money that groceries are nothing to them, that they're like a rounding error on their sort of like ledger, right? The kind of person who would like hire a professional chef or something, right? Or have people who like work for them full time, where like the sustenance, the food you need to eat is nothing, and the only time you need to think about it is when you're eating in a ridiculously sort of fancy restaurant, right? Everybody who buys groceries is aware of the prices and aware when they go up. Right. And even if you have enough money that, you know, groceries doubling in price isn't going to be a problem for you, you can still go, that sucks. I hate that.
How much could a banana cost, Michael? $20? Yeah. Okay, does anybody... Maybe Arrested Development. Is it $10? It was something ridiculous. It was funny. How much could a banana cost?
$10. How much? It's one banana, Michael. How much could that cost? $10. Yeah. And so... you have these things that people are engaging with, and I mean, people can be like addicted to video games too. Sure. People can have a negative relationship with almost anything that you can spend a lot of time or energy.
But they should be the exception. Yeah, when there's a large part of your user base, and they've actually got doom scrolling is actually a term.
We're like, this is miserable,
right? Then
this is the worst.
You have to at least recognize that maybe your demographic is different enough that the approach for one doesn't work for the other. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is interesting because I think Twitter is a platform that doesn't have a lot of goodwill. I think most people who use Twitter on some level really dislike Twitter. Right. I think a lot of right-wing people go, they're silencing our voices, and I think a lot of people, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, go, it's a really sort of echo chambery place. Yeah. And if they're less self-aware, they point to people with opinions that are different from them and go, they have an echo chamber, and we have a normal room. Their chamber is all echoey, and ours, the acoustics are fine here. I hear a wide variety of opinions. I get mad about stuff people say all the time. It can't be an echo chamber. There are people who I disagree with who I still show up on my timeline. Okay.
That's a good one.
But so people, and then people are worried about being silenced. I think some people are saying, I'm getting banned for this stuff that's ridiculous. I got my Twitter suspended for saying this really obviously hyperbolic thing about how much I hate this person. And then there are people being like, well, this person's not getting banned, and they're sending actual death threats on Twitter. And so I think, nobody who uses Twitter doesn't have at least one significant thing that they say, this really sucks. Right. And even if you don't have any of those issues, I think the issue is that you can just fall into an unhealthy usage pattern so easily.
So when you're saying that, to me, the phrase that pops in my head is reading the room poorly. And as the new owner, I think Elon Musk is doing exactly that. And the other perfect example in the last week where that happened was Rob Ford and the school workers, where he did that whole, oh, I've got no control over this. I have no choice. I have to legislate them back to work before they've even had a chance to strike, and stick in something from the Charter of Rights for Canada that's meant to preclude any kind of court challenge, even when it knowingly undermines their charter rights. And what was funny is that he had to capitulate, and after making such a big deal about how he had no choice and there was no way around it,
he just fixed it.
He just fixed it.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm going to push back against what you said a little bit there, because you talk about reading the room properly.
Yeah.
And I would say that doesn't even matter to me. Because I think there's this idea of reading the room, which is you need to have like an implicit understanding of what other people aren't saying out loud, right? There's sort of, that's what reading the room is.
Yes.
You go into a space.
I agree.
Somebody's not saying something and you're supposed to understand it anyways. Now, I think it's fine if people walk into a room and they can't understand the intricacies, the implicit stuff. If somebody needs something laid out for them explicitly. I think, somebody can sort of look a little silly or do something that's not great in a space, but I think it's fair to expect somebody to need to be told something explicitly if they don't understand that extra level.
I think the part that's missing there, though, is that maybe there's a difference between somebody who's coming in as an equal and somebody who's coming in as the boss.
So what I will say is, all that being said, that's not a reason why you should go easier on Elon Musk. I think Elon Musk is terrible because people are telling him explicitly.
No, that's what I'm saying though.
Yeah,
coming in as the boss, like if you're coming in as a participant, that's one thing, and I agree that you need to. People shouldn't suffer. Because they don't have either the experience or the tools or the ability to understand the stuff that people aren't telling them. But when you're coming in after spending $44 billion. It's your obligation to either know already or to ask. Instead of just dropping stuff on people.
To come in with a little bit of intellectual humility.
Right.
And to not just sort of stomp around.
So
one of the things he did you see how he fired people based off of how much code they'd written?
Yes.
A lot of decisions that just really don't make any sense.
Right. So I'm so the part that I left unsaid, and I shouldn't have because it would have been less clear, is when I talk about reading the room, I expect more out of Rob Ford, who's the premier of Ontario, and I expect more of Elon Musk, who's buying Twitter. Yeah.
I think, to me, it's not even reading the room. It's more making decisions with intentionality. I think if you're in a position of power where the decisions you're making are having really extreme direct effects on hundreds or thousands of people, and then sort of these secondary effects on vast swaths of people, I think you don't need to be able to understand anything intuitively, explicitly. And I don't think somebody should be criticized for not. But I think you need to weigh your decisions with the gravity that they are worth. I think if you're in that position of power, whether you get it or not, you need to make sure that you feel really confident that you figured it out before you make a decision. And I think that's totally separate from reading the room.
I totally agree with you. So I think maybe this is the danger of doing this all on the fly. So that's what came out of my mouth, but I completely agree with you. I think that's actually a better way of putting it.
I think we're value aligned.
Because there's almost an ableist kind of point of view to that I'm recognizing now as we're talking about it, even though you haven't said it. Because I think when some of those the ability to read social cues is not something that everybody has.
And Elon Musk has also specifically said he's on the spectrum. Doesn't excuse him for his behavior.
Exactly.
The fact that he's actually also specifically pretty ableist himself. He's not really like a great proponent of neurodiversity or
Oh, for sure, because a lot of times, I mean, even with everything, right? Because you could still be a racist and be a person of color. You can still be you could still internalize a lot of the biases of the culture that you were raised in.
It's usually, you usually have a little more experience with sort of the harms. When you're a marginalized person, it's easier to have an acute understanding of how marginalization hurts people. But that doesn't mean that you don't marginalize or hurt other people.
Or that you don't benefit necessarily from the structure.
Exactly.
So that you have a vested interest in perpetuating structure.
So anyways, that's our very long conversation just about Twitter.
So we need to do some more injustice stuff.
We're going to answer some questions now, and we're going to do it briskly. Not briskly.
No,
We'll give them time. We'll give them time.
Yeah.
Okay. So our first question comes from Milky Way, and they say, I have Arkham Knight Batgirl at Prestige 3, but I have Batman Ninja Batman and New 52 Superman at Prestige 0. Do I spend my power credits on prestiging Batgirl, or do I use them on Batman Ninja Batman or New 52 Superman?
So in the original comment, I asked, so who's your main damage dealer? Because I made the assumption that this was a team, and who's actually doing the work.
Yeah. And Milky Way replies, I don't have those three on a team. I just have Batwoman as part of my online team, and I don't use Batman Ninja Batman or New 52 Superman at all because their prestiges are too low. I just want to know which one could help me more in stuff like challenges and story mode, like which one is the best to spend my power credits on, or should I just wait 2 weeks for Luchador Bane's challenge mode?
I feel like we answered one aspect of this question last week even.
Yeah.
And that if you like any of those three characters, and your goal is to use them in challenges and story mode, don't spend it on any of them. Where you want to spend your money is on the cheaper store characters, where promoting them up to 7 or even to 10 doesn't cost as much.
Yeah.
They are all just as good and capable of story, with a few exceptions. There's some fights. I've been working on a new account.
Yeah.
And working through story mode, and I realized there's a few fights that you can't just power through.
Yeah.
That you actually have to plan a little better, especially the ones where they eliminate one or two of your teammates.
Yeah.
And I think in those cases, it's going to rely more on gear or a character that does damage over time, or both.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, if you like those characters, don't worry about promoting them high enough to be able to beat story mode, because you're going to wish you'd had more control later on when you get to the point where you're making up your multiplayer teams.
Yeah. So that's the answer. Don't focus on any of them. Find a person in the store that you like enough, basically. Don't find your favorite person. Find like the sort of 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. Somebody who you like more than the average guy, but not a ton.
Right. And maybe even somebody you don't like. I mean, the key to me is if the formulation of the question really changes it, right? So if Milky Way had been saying, I want somebody to help me with the multiplayer and win games.
Yeah.
Then don't focus on character. Focus on your gears and your augmentations for critical chance and critical damage.
That's true.
Those are the things that will get you faster fights in multiplayer and more wins.
Yeah. And so, yeah. I think that's good. I think that just about covers it. I don't know. Do you have anything else?
No, I'm just trying to think, because is it not... This, all right, so this is one of the problems with having this channel for so long.
Yeah. And
playing this game for, gosh, is it...
an uncountable number of hours.
Yeah. And how many years now has it been?
Oh my goodness. I don't know.
Has it been 8 years now? It feels like it. That feels like a right number. But
yeah,
there's some things that I take for granted, and I like... Sometimes I like seeing the same questions again, because sometimes my perspective has changed, and sometimes it forces me to look at my blind spots and say, so why is this question seem like, what am I missing from their perspective that makes me think the question's answer should be really obvious?
Yeah, which is just whoever you like the most.
Right. And so it's just interesting. Like, it's just, I don't know that I like... It's your comment about echo chamber makes me think of this. I don't know that I like necessarily confrontations when we have discussions, but I like having my ideas challenged a little bit every once in a while to refresh why I've come to the point. Because sometimes, you've thought it through, you've had a chance to think it through, you come to a conclusion, and then there's like almost a mental shortcut.
Yeah. So
that each time you don't have to figure things out from the first principles.
That's called a heuristic.
There
Mental
you go.
shortcuts are
Right.
heuristics.
Okay. So it's like that. So I think every once in a while it's nice to revisit them, because sometimes the information that you use to generate that initial heuristic has changed.
Yeah. And heuristics are also, in a lot of cases like this, low stakes. In injustice, it's very low stakes. But heuristics are also the exact same thing that leads to like stereotyping and discrimination.
Right.
You can build a mental model really easily and then skip right past the part in your brain where you think about sort of the underlying stuff.
Right.
And sometimes that underlying stuff has a lot of richness or depth or things worth considering.
Right. See, one area... All right, so this is interesting too. This I don't know if I've talked about this, but when I was younger and in school, I did competitive math.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was really interesting that I found that was the most helpful were these mental heuristics. So there were problems that were formulated in a way.
Yeah.
And if you recognized how the question was formulated,
you didn't even need to do the problem.
Didn't even have to think of the problem. You could just look at the numbers, plug them into this mental heuristic, and you could have the answer before the question is finished reading. So a good example of this is if you take a circle, you split it in half, and you do that sort of yin and yang pattern, right?
Yeah.
And one half is black and one half is white.
Yeah.
And there's inside that circle, there's a half circle of each color, but then each half circle has like another half circle that's the opposite where the diameter is the radius to give you that pattern, right?
I don't even know what you're talking about, man.
So, but
you've lost me so deeply.
So the question is, when you see that formulation, is what's the area of that one color?
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be hard, but all it is you look at it, as long as you recognize it's just half of that circle.
Yeah.
So I was so fast that I forgot to do the units, and that's why it was wrong. And then it stymied the other team for a while. Yeah. Where they had to think about it, and they just said the same thing that I did, but with units. Yeah. But they couldn't figure out why it was wrong until they realized, oh, it was just the units. But so it's just funny. Like there's in some places where the rules are absolute, like in math. Yeah. Heuristics are great.
Yeah. Because there's a lot less nuance. There are some places in which there are nuance, but in sort of like high school, university, whatever, like that sort of not like postdoctorate or like PhD level math stuff. A lot of times, a lot of the stuff you're working with is very absolute.
So the other question I saw formulated in a lot of math competitions is you've got a drawer full of socks. Yeah. They're all separated. Yeah. They're unmatched. You have this many of this sock, this many of this sock, this many of this sock, this many of this sock. How many do you need to pull
before you're sure?
As soon as you see the question, you ignore all the numbers. Yeah. You just count how many different socks there are and add one. That's your answer.
Mm. Oh.
Right? So, again, one of those shortcuts where when you're doing competitive
how many do you need to pull before you have at least one matching pair?
Right.
Is
ignore all the numbers. Yeah. Yeah. Ignore all the numbers.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I just know. I don't know why they're making these connections now. I'm feeling a little punchy. It's that time of day, and it's getting a little bit late, and I'm tired.
Yeah, so you're saying stuff, and you're like, "This makes so much sense," and it makes even less sense than what you would normally say out of your mouth a little bit, just because you're tired. But you're drawing those connections. Yeah. So what you're saying either is super profound, or it's even more garbled than your sort of normal sentence.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Because some of it I'm totally getting, and then you're talking about the shapes within the shapes, and I'm like, I have no clue. You might as well not be speaking English.
Yeah. But picture yin and yang without the little dots. It's just the black and the white with the little curve, extra curve. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways,
one more question. We're getting pretty long in this, but we got time for one more.
Yeah, I think we got time for one more. The dishes can wait. So, our question comes from, this is the person with the Cyrillic name that has been Romanized that I pronounced incorrectly last time. And I'm going to try to say, I'm not going to go into all the pronunciation stuff, the back and forth that we had, but I'm going to say it's Mark Horin. Mark Horin or Mark Horin? That's what I'm going with. I might have messed it up again, but I kind of like this. I like when we screw it up and somebody comes back and they go, no, it's a little bit like this. And it's been a while since we've had that. But I like sort of via message slowly narrowing down on the right pronunciation, because what it feels a little bit like is I'm used to when somebody's introducing themselves to me, they say their name out loud and then I try to repeat it, and then sometimes they go, no, it's this, and then I go that, and they go, no, it's this, and then I just repeat it, and then they go, yeah, you got it. And this is that one level of worse. Like, it's harder to do, it's slow. Okay. I have to say it, and then it gets posted, and then I have to think back, how did I pronounce it? And it feels, but it's this sort of clunkiness that feels almost a little satisfying. It's like, it makes it feel like I'm writing letters to somebody, and I'm worried that the mail carrier is going to get like lost in the snow, because it's like a snowstorm. Like it's that like extra layer of like just functionally difficult.
It's like a wickedly slow correction where your feedback is, in my mind, I'm picturing like the Titanic trying to get away from the iceberg. Yeah. And only we're not going to crash because there's no, like you said,
low stakes.
Low stakes, right? Yeah. But it is neat because there is this feedback, but in a way that I'm picturing a wave where there's a huge amount of oscillation back and forth where we're overcorrecting because we don't have the feedback to stop us where we're aiming for.
It's like you're playing chess over telephone based off of the grid coordinates and you have a bad connection. And then you're like, oh, I see what you're doing. You're moving the pieces on your own board and you're going, oh, you sly dog, and you just moved it yourself. And then you go, okay, rook to e4. And they go, D? And you go, no, rook to e4. E?
Funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. As an aside, Queen's Gambit was a great series.
Still have not watched that show.
Oh, no?
Lot of TV I need to watch.
Oh.
What I'm watching right now, I just started it. I'm watching Blockbuster.
Okay. I just want to tell you something. I don't know if it's your experience or my it's my what I'm bringing to the show.
Yeah.
There's the part when I first watched it, because I watched it twice.
Queen's Gambit?
Queen's
I've
Gambit.
not watched it any time.
Right. So there was a part where I was feeling really stressed because of the common trope where a young girl or a young woman abuse plays a part in it, right? Like, and it didn't, but I felt like that it was because I've seen so many shows.
Yeah, you're waiting.
I was waiting for it, and I was nervous, and I was anxious for her during the entire show until I got through it, and I was able to enjoy it in a different way the second time around, because then I could just be in that moment and not be on tenterhooks thinking that something bad was going to happen to her.
That's an interesting sort of larger discussion about how we portray people and groups of people in media, right? Where there's a lot of times where when people get representation, their sort of first representation is like a really sort of stereotypical one.
Yeah.
And there's sort of, you have to ask if it's like a necessary bad, right? If it's better to have them on screen first in that bad way, and then you can sort of move on later to those better representations. But it's interesting that you saw that, and there was such a strong association with young women and trauma, or it was violence or abuse, right? Especially in like a drama, right? A drama starring a young woman who's kind of independent and trying to carve out her own space in the world. I don't know. I hope
it's not a big spoiler, right? Because she starts off as an orphan.
I watched like part of one episode, so yeah. But a woman who's
somebody's vulnerable,
figuring out themselves and trying to grow and sort of develop into a fully realized person, and just having really sort of horrible stuff happen to them. Yeah.
But good, I highly recommend it.
I guess it's also hard too, because when you think about shows that start off with a young person in an orphanage, I think they very rarely have like a exclusive, really sunny disposition to them. I've never seen it, but from what I gather, Annie is relatively positive. But
my experience with Anne of Green Gables, and that's pretty good too. I think the problem, I guess, is that we see so much media, even when there are exceptions, that there's hopefully 20 years from now it'll be gone, but there's this sort of overlay of that, like you said, potential for trauma, where trauma is used so much to dramatize things. It doesn't have to. Yeah,
it's interesting. I think that's a big conversation. I have all these thoughts swirling around in my head, but I don't even think I can say anything about it, because I don't know if I have anything to add. But you're making me think about things. I don't know, for whatever that's worth. So anyways, Mark says, thank you guys. You butchered my name a little bit, but not a problem. All good. I think it's still kind of fair for the characters not to be able to, quote, smurf, adjust their stats to lower promotion as the player needs them to be, because it would have been hard for the dev to come up with such a system in game. But this certainly, certainly this feels bad for someone like me who started more casual and went to try hard in multiplayer a lot. In terms of stat balance, I am sure now that I don't have much reason to get those HP cards for alliance credits, as they will only make my fights more difficult at all the stages, while my interest as a player is to get as many fights in a period of time and make those fights as quick as I can. Thank you guys. Having someone in the community to share ideas or thoughts with feels really cool and makes the experience of the game so much more enjoyable. So great comment. I think this is an interesting point, and I think what's funny about this, my first thought when I'm reading this is, we always preface everything we say by, we don't know what type of player you are, right? It depends a lot on what you want to do. And I think Mark here but I think Mark is also, funnily, the closest person to the player that we have in our heads when we give advice for a player. Right? Somebody who wants the battles fast.
That's us.
Yeah. So Mark, and not that it's like a moral good or a moral bad, it makes it easier for us to talk about it, because Mark's goals are basically our goals.
Right.
When we go into a fight. When we say, we don't know what you're interested in, we don't know what's most important to you. You know, when we were talking about our own stuff, we were try-hard multiplayer people who want to have as fast battles as possible, as many as possible, and sort of maximize our battle points. Yeah.
So the funny thing, though, is that we have been like that for years and years and years.
Yeah.
But in the last few months, I feel like I'm going away from it. I'm looking for something to make it more interesting because at this point, I don't have anything more I want to accumulate.
Yeah.
I don't really want to take any of the medals past Elite 3 because then it'll just mean that you can only have medal teams or the other people on teams are only going to be supports.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's taken me this long to get to this point. And as we find somebody who's in line with our... what's the word I'm looking for? The way we play the game.
Yeah. That
I'm finally moving away from that and playing a little differently, which is what you're seeing.
So what you're saying is you're still better.
I'm not better. It's just that despite this kind of player being what we were for the majority of the time that we're playing, I feel like that in order to maintain interest in the game at this point, I'm having to switch, and I am maintaining interest in it, but it means that I'm playing the game differently.
Yeah, you gotta get a little weird and funny with it.
Yeah,
I had a conversation recently, about Settlers of Catan, and somebody who really didn't I take it too seriously. You know, I'm not saying that other people take it too seriously. I'm not pretending I'm not the problem, but if somebody does something and it screws me over, I just get mad. And I want to spend the rest of the game just trying to screw that person over at the detriment of my own game.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's like a very like serious way of playing the game. And also, it might be what is the most optimal way to play over a long series of games with a lot of samples. Because if somebody knows that if they do something, if they take an action against you, you are going to come down on them with vengeance and fury, then what it teaches people over time, the sort of meta level of the game, the political layer, is if I come after this person, it's bad for me. It's like touching a hot stove, right? I screw this person over and I get burned. Right? But the approach that I take when I play Settlers is when I feel like I'm definitely going to lose, I just go really weird with it. I figure out what my bit is, what sort of way I'm going to entertain myself for the rest of that game. And hopefully in a way that's not annoying, right? And so maybe I go for a sheep port, and my only thing I'm ever going to trade for the rest of the game is for as many sheep as possible. And I'm going to offer people, the one thing they want, and they have to give me 3 or more sheep every time, and I'm going to see how many sheep I can mill through. And then every once in a while, you spend long enough doing something weird and that really feels like you've sort of almost like
transcended the game.
Not transcended the game, but you almost like yourself out of the ring to just have fun.
But you're playing a different game than everybody. You're in a parallel universe.
I've got my own
where
goals.
The different stuff matters.
Yeah. And then every once in a while, you find yourself at the end of the game realizing that somehow being so non-threatening has let people sort of just give you 3 sheep every time over and over again. And you've had like 50 sheep run through your hand, and then you can win.
You won that way once, I remember.
I remember. And I wasn't trying to. And it doesn't happen a lot. But that's like the sweetest nectar. Because I won both games. I thought I was going to lose. I made a new game inside the first one, and then I had so much fun that I didn't even realize that I could win, and then it happened. And so that's the real prize. When you play this really sort of hard, there's this idea of being like try hard or being sweaty, right? When you're really sort of like white knuckle, like, you're really doing your best. And so it's one thing when you're sweaty and you win, and it's another thing where you're in your own world. And I'm winning all the games at once. I've won a game that I've made up in my head, and I'm winning the real game.
The original one.
The OG game, which I came in to win. And so, and you can talk about what's best for you, right? The best thing in terms of the numbers for Injustice is always to play as fast as possible, as many fights won, and the only time you care about like increasing your stats is to min-max the battle points, right? Where you look at all the measurable numbers and you say, I'm making this the biggest, right? And then there's the second layer, which is what's the most fun for me. And we always tell people to pursue what's the most fun. And sometimes those things are the same thing. If you're a numbers person like we are, if that's the thing that tends to matter to you, then probably it's both. and then maybe sometimes you can mix it up, but the main time you play is in both. But sometimes, that my friend can't help himself from doing it, but he plays and optimizes all the fun out of that game. He'll lose a game to make a point, and he'll feel bad and angry about it. And he goes, I go to games to make friends. I don't go to games to lose friends. And I play Settlers of Catan and I feel like I lose friends. And so it's funny, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess this is, it's funny because you now have a little bit of a different goal. You started out trying to white knuckle win the game.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're trying to collect as many sheep as you can.
Because I feel like I've gotten to the point where I've actually done that as far as I can.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to do anymore. I no longer want to max out everybody Elite 10, level 60.
Yeah.
Because then it burns another part of the game.
Yeah. You're sort of sitting on your dragon's hoard, and you're trying to make like penny towers and see how high you can stack them before they fall. Yeah. Anyways, I think that's a good place to end it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy with our discussion this episode. I feel like I had a good time. I don't know about you.
Me too.
Yeah. All right. Pretty solid. Oh no, I wrote the Eliza. I had an Eliza thing, but I updated it and I did it in the wrong episode. So you're gonna have to wait. The episode's gonna be longer. Extra content for you guys. It's not very good stuff. Okay. This is a shout out to Eliza, lazy cat owner Kaiten. She put her cat alone in a room with a mouse, and her cat just kept trying to get out. Did nothing about the mouse. This shout out was brought to you by a cat with no sense of duty or obligation. Really, sort of the only place that they could contribute to the family. Just falling short. Other than, love and whatever, affection,
right.
All those intangibles.
I think that's the best argument for just existing. And the way we've let the puritanical ideals make us feel like we're wasted unless we actually contribute something.
I'm very capitalist. I think a cat needs a job. I think if a cat doesn't have a job, it's lazy.
That's jorts.
Yeah, and you can quote me on that. That's my official stance on cats. I'm hyper capitalist, but only for cats.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm crying here. I'm wiping my eyes. I don't think you can hear me crying, but this was fun. I had a good time. Thank you very much.
All right. So that's not enough for us though. We also need some of y'all's money. So you should.
No, we don't.
You should go to you should go to patreon.com if you have as good a time as we do. Yeah. And you want to toss us a couple bucks. It's not going to be the reason why we, do a video or don't do a video. It's not going to make us continue this.
Yeah, it's not going to be the reason why we stop or continue this channel.
Yeah, there's no threat to you one way or the other. We're going to do this for as long as we want and then stop when we want. And it's not going to, if we get enough money, I guess if we got like thousands of dollars every month, we might put a little more work into this. But where we are, it seems inconceivable that you're gonna make us significantly step up or down our quality. So there's really no stakes.
No stakes.
But if you want to make us feel a little good, and you think it'll make you feel a little good, then we sure would appreciate if you kicked us like $1 or something a month on Patreon. The money, the amount doesn't really matter either. It's whatever is comfortable for you. And obviously, we only ever want anybody kicking in money that is something that they will not miss.
Right.
We don't want you paying an amount that it hurts to see go.
Right.
And if you want to buy a new video game,
it is a recession.
Yeah, if you want to buy a new video game or something instead, we don't pretend to think that we're worth a lot of money from a lot of people.
Right.
But it always makes our day a little bit when someone kicks us some cash on Patreon. It feels a little special. Yeah. So if you want to participate in that moment with us, you can toss us some cash on Patreon.
And so this is where we like to give a big thank you to the people who already are supporting us on Patreon.
Yeah. And
that would be Bomble Ben, Consul Peasant, and Edwoon, supporting us at the highest tier, Last Word. Sinemac and Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, Eddydoo, and Hoshi 127, who are supporting us on the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 2for1, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E at the gratitude level.
Thank you so much for watching. And thanks so much for all your support. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.